Iced Radio, take one.
Dunkin' Iced Coffee is... Ooh, sorry, one more time? Dunkin' Iced it... Ooh, Kelly, we're trying to record a timely summer-focused radio spot for Dunkin' Iced. Can you stop with the shaking?
But, this is the sound a Dunkin' Ice makes. Maybe you should keep it in?
Well, yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. Try all the Dunkin' Refreshers, iced coffees, cold brews, and lattes. Dunkin' Iced. America runs on Dunkin'.
There's a light on the hill from a bush that's burning.
Welcome to the Deconstructionist podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson, and welcome back. This is part 2 of my interview with Pete Enns. So if you didn't hear last week's episode, hit pause on this one, go back, listen to the first part so that this part makes sense. And if you've already heard it, welcome back. Thank you for listening. And this is the second part and conclusion of my interview with Pete Enns on his new book, Curveball, When Your Faith Takes Turns You Never Saw Coming, or How I Stumbled and Tripped My Way to Finding a Bigger God. Love having Pete on. Pete and his partner over on their podcast, The Bible for Normal People, Jared Bias, are two amazing guys who are doing amazing work and do it with humor, which I always appreciate. I think these are conversations that should be fun, and they keep that in mind at all times, and they make them fun. So check out their work. We'll have all the links in the show notes. As far as our stuff goes, lots more to come. Brand new guests next week. Got some brand new guests that have never been on the podcast before, covering different sort of vantage points that we've not covered before. So very excited to introduce some of them to you. But www.thedeconstructionist.com. If you go there, you can see our blog with some new blog posts, all sorts of other goodies on there, our web store, our Patreon, which is completely redone, has early access to episodes, uncut, unedited, amongst other things. You guys know. Just go to the website. All right. Without further ado, let's get to it. This is part 2 of my interview. Super fun with Pete freaking Enns.
I think it's calling to me. And it said, be.
Can we talk about the exile here for a minute? Because it seems to us like you broke your promise. Because there is no Davidic king on the throne. The last Davidic king, he was blinded and his 3 sons were killed. That's 2 Kings talks about that. And, it seems like that promise is now null and void. So what's up with that, oh Lord? Oh Lord, who's always faithful and almighty, so you can do anything you want to, and you're faithful, and we're seeing a big break in the system here. That's the kind of stuff that I'm attracted to in the Bible, because it validates how our experience affects our theology. And that's biblical. It's not every page of the Bible, but it doesn't matter. It's there.
It's almost as if the authors were themselves struggling with their relationship with the divine and writing in from the perspective of, this is my relationship with the divine and this is my struggle. It almost
no, John, you're so wrong. They were writing truth that cannot ever be questioned.
Yes.
Even if biblical writers contradict each other, still you can't question it. You just have to do what they say, even if it contradicts other things they say. That's just how it works, right? So, but that's why, I think the cure, not to get off topic here of Curveball, but I think the cure to this is what it's been for so many people. I just sat down and I really started reading the Bible, and I allowed the questions to arise as I was reading. And by the time you get to chapter 6 of the Bible and everybody drowns, you start having some questions, or Genesis 1 and 2 that have 2 very different, incompatible creation stories. You can't help but ask questions, and I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it when you said earlier. I think a large part of it is just this human desire to define everything and to understand everything and to put a name to everything. And when we can't do that, our default, I think, reaction is panic or fear. And I think that you're right. The mystics, I think, kind of figured it out, where they just almost sort of delight in ambiguity and are overjoyed in the fact that they can't figure it out, and that God is undefinable, And
there's something about Judaism itself. Again, not to. I hate when people make blanket statements about Christianity or Judaism or anything, but let me make a sort of a blanket statement here. Within the Jewish tradition, there is a tremendous openness to the ambiguities of Scripture that give you an excuse to explore more deeply. And that has not been part of the Christian model over the past few hundred years. I think you're right that, again, the fourfold method of interpretation, the mystical dimension of Christianity that's been there, I would argue since John's Gospel, especially, it's really there. That's a part of the Christian journey itself. But we forget that we're trained to almost block that out of our imaginations about God, and it's really unfortunate. I think it creates. Okay, what you gain from that is a sense of certainty, a sense of stability, which we all want in some level. But what you lose there is, I think, the joy of exploration, where like children, we're trying to figure our parents out or something. We just get to do that, and it's not, if you get it wrong, they'll spank you or punish you or something. It's just a privilege to be able to do that. And I've become a lot more relaxed over the years about some of these things, because I know that I don't know. And I'm somewhat amused when people claim that they know. I asked somebody like, I don't understand the Trinity. What do you mean you don't understand the Trinity? It's like ice and water and steam. It's like, no, you give me an analogy. I said, I don't understand the Trinity. Explain it to me. Well, it's like a 3-leaf clover. Is it really like a 3-leaf clover? Is that where you're going to go with? So, all these things that we talk about I think they are steeped in mystery. I think, I think Christ is the mystery revealed, not revealed in the sense that now we understand the Christ, but the Christ is the mystery that we deal with, right? And to me, it's like, I'm so happy that it's not like I'm going to be quizzed in theology one day after I shuffle off this mortal coil. At least I hope not. Yeah, I hope I get at least a C if I am. But if not, it's fine with me too, because this is, I really think that all are thinking about this stuff. It matters, and I enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it's like, I can see God saying, there, Pete. That was really a nice try. You don't know what you're talking about at all. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's
fine with me.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to that, where I think a God that I could possibly figure out is probably not an attractive God to follow, especially if we're talking about a God whose love is infinite, and the term infinite in and of itself is unimaginable.
Right.
I want a God that's so big and so expansive that I can't possibly understand the totality of God. Maybe I get a taste when someone loves me,
which is a great analogy, because this is all about like tasting. Yeah. Taste and see that he is good. I mean, I think those are really good metaphors in the Bible for describing exactly what you're saying. It's, we can't like know God exhaustively, or even like 80% or 50%. God is an inexhaustible mystery, but can we rest in God without understanding God? And again, those are the things, this is the language I've picked up over the years that have helped me tremendously. It's like, I don't have to, what if God is real and just likes your company. And you can sort of be there without having, like with good friends, you don't have to talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to make petitions all the time. You just sit there and maybe learn to let go of that that transactional relationship that we keep up. That transactional relationship with God is something that we understand. That's something that I think that goes to like our base humanities, where it's sort of like karma. You have to do things so good things happen. And what if the universe doesn't work that way? And again, I know next to nothing about quantum physics, even though I devoted 2 chapters to it in my book. But nobody understands this. But the whole the mystery of all that is I think it's just a reminder again to us that this is so above our pay grade, and it's enough just to sort of sometimes be in awe and amazed with all of it without understanding it, and let that amazement and awe be a part of communion with God. I know I don't really see the problem with that. I don't have to come up with a definitive answer, and I won't, because I can try, but it's going to be wrong on some deep, important level. So I'm not going to get obsessed about it.
Well, and that approach, I think, takes a lot of the pressure off of us for having to know the answer. One of the things I definitely want you to talk about, and partially because I love the Beatles, is you have this great analogy where you talk about, and we sort of started getting into this a little bit. You talk about historical criticism, and I think one of the things that we take for granted, or a lot of people just never learn, is just the fact that the Bible didn't fall from the sky fully formed in its final version. In fact, there's differences between the Protestant Bible and the Catholic version of the Bible that include different books or extra books, we should say. And a lot of these were different styles of writings. There's apocalyptic literature. There's genealogy. There's all sorts of different types of writings. And as you mentioned before, there's hyperbole. There's tons of metaphors, and so each document written by a different person or a group of people over a long period of time, and eventually, became a fully formed, bound book. But the way in which we approach the way we read it from start to finish is the same. And so, I think that's a starting place for a lot of us is kind of understanding that we have to approach different parts of the Bible in different ways, right. and in order to understand what the original audience how they would have understood it,
right.
And also the other thing that I'd love for you to talk about that you mentioned also is I think we also have to go back to our Jewish forefathers. They wrote the thing. Jesus was a Jew, and so I often like to go back and hear, well, what do the Jewish scholars have to say about what we call the Old Testament? And you even reference one of my favorites, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, a big curveball for me, and what I mean by that, we haven't talked about this, what I mean by a curveball at all is just life happens to you, and those experiences are not that fastball down the middle that is coming. The ball bends away from you and you miss it. And in order to stay in the game, you have to make an adjustment to your swing, which is sort of making adjustments to our theology. That has to happen. And that's a good thing because, God is bigger than just that fastball down the middle that you can hit all the time. So for me, graduate school and studying the historical critical method or methods, which I was exposed to in seminary, but didn't really study just because of the nature of the school. That was a big curveball to me because the Bible doesn't act the way I was led to believe that it acts. It's much more complicated. It's very, very messy. There are true contradictions and at least very different perspectives in both the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. And acknowledging that was a big step. I mean, really just owning that was a very, very big step for me. I mean, I tell the story in the book where by my second month of graduate school, I came home one day and I was taking courses on Israelite origins, which is like, where did the Israelites come from? And it's much more complicated than the biblical story. Probably it contradicts the biblical story in certain places. But I came home and I just parked my bike out back. I went into the kitchen, and I remember just staring at the refrigerator. And what I had been sort of pondering for a few weeks came to the surface. And I just said to myself, I'm not sure that Abraham was a real person, which is sort of like generally acknowledged in biblical scholars. Like, it's not really a contestable point, really. It might have been, but it reads very differently than just, this is an account of a person who lived, whose dialogue we're aware of, and all that kind of stuff. And it just really hit me that, and here's the thing. I didn't go into graduate school a complete idiot. You know, I had read things and I had talked to people and I had professors who would gently introduce us to these kinds of things. But all it took was like a month of reading things and listening to some lectures. And that old model began leaking. The boat was leaking pretty quickly. And I had to think about how I wanted to approach this. And thankfully, I was in a place where I could keep an open mind about some things. But it's that my relationship with the Bible changed, and not for the worse. I think, for the better. And I couldn't count on everybody else understanding that, but this was my existence. This was my reality. These were my experiences, and that's how I began to see things differently, and about the historicity of the Bible and the agendas of the biblical writers, some of which are rather propagandistic. As you mentioned before, people writing at different times for different reasons are bound to have differences of opinion on things, and the importance of the exile that drove the Israelites, actually at this point the Judahites, to compile what eventually became the Bible. All that stuff, it was fascinating to me, but it was a very new way of thinking about the Bible. And for people who have been taught the centrality of Scripture for faith, the next step is not just thinking about the Bible differently, but it's thinking about God differently, right? So, if you understand like some of the texts on violence, divine violence in the Bible, if you see those, my opinion here, if you see those in their historical cultural context, I don't look to those passages to reveal to me the deep nature of God. I think God is something else. That's my opinion. People will disagree. That's fine. They're wrong. I'm right. But let's, those images of God that were given in Scripture are highly encultured images of God. And not that my culture is better. We have our own hang-ups, but it's my responsibility, I think, as a person of faith, to think through, listen, I don't think God's a warrior that kills people and says, take their land. I just don't believe that, and I won't believe it. But it's in the Bible. I know it is, but there are reasons why it's in the Bible. There are reasons why it's there. And I respect the fact that the ancient Israelites conceived of God that way, at least at certain times in their history, because that was their cultural influence. They all had gods that went to war for them. Now, I think within the Hebrew Bible, you see some pushback against some of those ideas as well. So within the Bible itself, you have movement and change. But looking at the Bible that way was for me the first real big step toward accepting the responsibility to reevaluate my faith, to interrogate my faith when need be.
Yeah, I think one of the hang-ups that we have in this modern time is that we are stuck on the uniqueness of Christianity specifically, and I can't speak for other religions because this is what I grew up immersed in. But and you talk about this, you address this in the book as well, talking about the geographical influence, even based on the different invaders coming in and working alongside of the Jewish people at the time. The Greek influence and all these things, and some of the stories that are borrowed. All you have to do is look into guys like Joseph Campbell, Otto Rank, guys who are these famous mythologists, to look that there are some stories in the Old Testament that are clearly borrowed from older traditions,
right.
But the point isn't the originality of it. The point is the meaning behind the story, and yet we get hung up on on things being, they have to be historical fact,
right? And those other cultures, they got it from the Bible, right? That's how the argument usually goes. It's like you've got all these flood stories. Well, the oldest one's the biblical story, and that's the right one. That's a historical one, and all the other ones are parodies of that ultimate historical truth, where they get it all mythological and stuff like that. And again, that's a protectionist view of the Bible, but nobody thinks that. I mean, no learned person says that, because the Israelites came on the scene fairly late. And some of these stories were there long before the Israelites ever came on the scene, but they appropriated those stories to speak their theology. And that's why the biblical flood story is not the same as the epic of Atrahasis, for example, or what little bit we see from the Gilgamesh epic. It's not that they're not simply repeating it, but they're repurposing these myths for different theological concerns. And once you see that, I think it's very hard to unsee it. And then the next thing you think about is maybe historicity isn't the central thing here. Maybe it's not the purpose of the Bible to establish historicity for the use of apologetics. Maybe that's not what's going on here. It's a thoroughly encultured anthology of literature. And that, my students will say the same thing. It's comforting to them to see the Bible that way, because that can speak into our humanity as well, where our views of God are likewise encultured. And part of that culture is the Christian tradition as a whole. That's part of our culture. But still, it's, we're, as a friend of mine put it, we're winging it in the spirit here. We're trying to make sense of things intellectually. And I think the baseline message that really does come through, at least for me, is how are you treating other human beings? How are you treating other creatures? How are you treating the planet that we live on? I think those are becoming very central questions for me as I try to live out my faith. Those are the encultured questions that I come at this faith with. And no, I'm not saying, okay, Moses or others didn't talk about recycling or earth care, all right?
Yeah.
But I do, and we have to. That's our responsibility. And so we're continuing this tradition. We're furthering this tradition along to a point where, if you talk to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and some others like this, the point is what the omega point, the end of it all, which is where all will be in all. It's, for him, it's the end of the evolutionary process. It could be billions of years from now, but we're all part of this moving forward with the tradition. And I like that because it puts a tremendous responsibility on us to do the very things we've been told we should never do. Use our imaginations, really use our reason, use our full humanity. This is why I like the Wesleyan quadrilateral, using our whole humanity to talk about God and to articulate God and to let that affect how we actually live.
Mother's Day is coming, and if you don't get Mom the perfect gift, she won't be angry, just disappointed. So go with Drinks from Drizzly, the go-to app for alcohol delivery. Send favorites near, far, or to wherever the moms in your life are. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com and get the best drinks to the best moms and plenty of time for Mother's Day. Ding dong, it's Drizzly. Must be 21 plus, not available in all locations. For the Millers, movie nights were once tradition. Now Sarah could hardly get through the opening credits, not on that old couch. But one day while shopping on QVC.com, she learned La-Z-Boy recliners had slimmed down a bit. And in just a few clicks, Sarah got her La-Z-Boy chair and a popcorn maker and a soundbar by Bose. And with one quick trip to QVC.com, movie night and Sarah's back were saved. Shop QVC.com/podcast and use code QVC20podcast for $20 off $40 for new customers. This is shopping brought to life.
I love that. We got to spend a little time on this just because it's a fun chapter you put in there where you get into all things weird, like a little of the paranormal stuff. So my other favorite topic, but you talk about just sort of like the academia that's being conducted and the studies that are being conducted around some of these things like near-death experiences or past lives. And of course, as a human being, and since the beginning of time, we've all asked the question, well, what happens after we die? And I think if you're not curious about that, then you're not alive. You're not.
You're in death denial if you don't think about it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you do mention a couple of people that whose work you followed a little bit. So talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things being done right now? Some of the studies that are being conducted on this.
Well, I mean, the person who really got me into this was Dale Allison, who teaches at Princeton Seminary. He's a New Testament scholar, but he's written stuff on, what we might call the paranormal or parapsychological, maybe is another way of putting it. And also, and he is the one who, through his writings, introduced me to the division of I forget DOPS. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm fumbling here, but University of Virginia has a division that's part of their neuroscience division. It's not like some frat boys in a basement or something. These are PhDs in brain science who study the paranormal. They've been doing it there for over 50 years now. The study of this goes back, in earnest to the 19th century, but even before that, and these things have been documented since like Plato. People talk about this stuff all the time, and people have had experiences of like out-of-body consciousness or past lives or things like that. And I just feel like, I was never, ever told by anybody, your theology needs to maybe incorporate how people have experienced death, what happens very often at deathbed scenes where people sit up and are all of a sudden very conscious, and they're seeing people, they're talking to people, and then they fall back down and they die, right? And it's there are so many stories that are just that I find credible. There are whack jobs out there that make things up just to sell books, but there are other people who have experiences who keep quiet about it for decades because they're afraid people will think they're crazy, and they can't really explain it adequately anyway. And Dale Allison is one of those people. He's what he calls a thin person. There's some people who have a connection, with the veil between our world and the next, whatever that means. And the Celts talked about thin places, and Dale Allison talks about thin people. And I found that I know people who have had just classic paranormal experiences. I haven't really. Maybe a little bit, and when I was younger, but I just think I just get passed by because I'm so left brain. It's like, he's useless, just keep moving. But I know people I trust, and I know their character, and they say, let me tell you what happened to me. I'm like, I get it. And here's my bottom line. There's another big issue I deal with in this chapter, which I have no business talking about, which is the mind-body problem. This is a very big philosophical thing. It's as old as Western civilization. And basically the gist is this: does our mind exist independent of our physical bodies, or is it exist solely by virtue of our physical bodies? In other words, when you die, does your mind or consciousness, does that continue? And if these paranormal things are in any sense true, and some of the stories are just, it's hard to deny what some people say, unless there's a grand conspiracy and people are just pathological liars, right? But I don't think that's the case. But if these things are true, it would seem to lend some information to this mind-body problem, that maybe consciousness does not depend on our physical existence. And you would think that Christians would say, oh, that's fantastic, there's an afterlife and all that kind of stuff. But let the other shoe drop. These things happen to people irrespective of their religious affiliation. Across cultures, across time, across languages, and across religions, including no religion at all. And sometimes people have these experiences and they say, I think I want to explore a life of faith, or whatever that might look like for them. But see, that's just it. The curveball for me is, it's one that I welcome, but it's still a curveball. What does this near-death experience business and all that, what does that tell us about the nature of God? If these things are true, what is God? And what is God like? And if it's not just evangelicals who have these out-of-body or after-death or near-death experiences, if it's not just them, if it's that, if that's that Hindu person over there, right, or the Jew over there, or whatever over there, if they're all having this sort of experience, you've got to start thinking about, maybe Christianity is beautiful, but maybe that line drawing that we tend to do and that we find in the Bible itself, maybe that doesn't tell the whole story. Maybe there's more to it than that. And that's why I like the clinical study of paranormal experiences, which tries to bring some rigor, some clinical boundaries to it. And UVA, University of Virginia, they've been doing this, and people have studied various aspects of this for decades. And these are not evangelicals or people with a religious axe to grind. They just say there are things that happen that science as we know it cannot explain. And to deny this, I would say, universal human experience for a long, long, long time is actually not scientific. And then you have this battle between, the scientific materialists. The only thing that's true is what you can test and what you can see. Then the other saying, we only see a small fraction of reality. And Dale Allison is very good with that as well. He, I have in a footnote, an endnote rather, he has this wonderful story he tells about his dog, Ralph. And he says, Ralph knows a lot. When it gets to be a certain time of day, he knows he's going to be fed. When he sees me stand up to go into the kitchen, he knows he's going to be fed. And he knows I'm going to go to the cupboard. I'm going to open the door. I'm going to take the dog food out. I'm going to put it in his bowl. I'm going to give him water. He knows all that with absolute certainty. But Ralph has no idea where the dog food comes from. He doesn't know what a truck is, really. He doesn't know who made it. He doesn't know what a kibble really is. Like, what am I eating here? He has no sense of that. So if you think of knowledge as a circle, right? Ralph has like a couple of degrees of that 360 degrees. That's what he knows very, very well. But the rest of it he doesn't know. And, the point is that it's not too different for human beings. There are things, the entire possibility of knowledge, we have a small sliver of it. And, Allison says things like, we don't even know what an atom is, really.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty important. There are many things we don't really know. And some of those things that we don't know are things that we will never know through scientific methods that are not, and rightly so, they're not prepared to do this sort of thing, and these things are just impossible. They can't be true. I don't buy that. I'm with many other people, including Dale Allison. I'm not a scientific materialist, even though I love science, which will come through in the book. It can't explain everything. So that opens us up again to the issues of mystery, of unknowing, of not knowing, and this truly incomprehensible existence that we live in, and we're just going along for the ride, and it's okay. It's if God is real, it's going to be okay. To me, that's the bottom line, and I believe that God is real. I don't understand God. I don't think God is a man hiding behind like the Andromeda Galaxy with the beard. I think God is in and through everything, but I also think this God is personal. And I don't even know what I mean when I say that, but whatever it means for God to be personal, it's got to be as mysterious and unfathomable as anything else we talk about God, and not personal the way we are, but I think personal in a much deeper, much more pervasive way. And that's truly what I believe. And I don't think I'm saying those things to myself because I'm afraid of dying or anything like that. I just think those things are true.
See, there you go. Just talking about how God is beyond, again,
How dare I do that? Right.
Yeah. I want God to be small and definable, but yeah, that's.
Well, you can have a God like that too. It just will fall apart when when you get those curveballs, folks, that's when that clearly defined deity begins to take some hits. And again, we should be thankful for that because, again, a thing I repeat in the book a few times, we get a bigger and better God in the wake of that, and not bigger and not a bigger version of what we already know, but something outside of what we know. And I honestly, John, I don't know how else to do this Jesus business. I don't know how else to do this other than simply accept the mystery of God that I get to think about and try to live into as best as I can.
See, I'm 100% with you. I think the more I learn, the less I know, and the more happy I am about that. Because I want to believe in something bigger than me, and to be bigger than me means to be beyond human, beyond anything I can possibly articulate, and that brings me comfort. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good thing.
Right. I do too.
Well, thank you so much. It's always fun having you on and talking about this.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, it's good to be here too.
Let's pitch the book. I want to encourage people to go ahead and get it. It's called Curveball: When Your Faith Takes Turns You Never Saw Coming, or How I Stumbled and Tripped My Way to Finding a Bigger God. I love that. So go out and check out Pete's podcast too, The Bible for Normal People, and you have the new one, The Faith for Normal People.
Faith for Normal People, right. We just launched that as we're recording this. We just launched that, yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to go check that out right now. So go check it out. Everything will be in the show notes. But again, thanks as always for coming on. This was
sure, John. Thank you for asking me. I really appreciate it.
John was young and driven with a heart of gold. Finished seminary, married, found a church he could go home. Made a living, giving dying folks a shoulder and a hand, until he told his leaders that he had some feelings for another man. And they said, John, you must go and take your broken heart and walk it to the door. We know you're hurting and you've been giving, but now you're damaged goods and you gotta give some more. John, we love you, but we can't love you. Jane, you must go. We didn't know your quest would lead you down this road. We know you're searching and you've been giving, but now you've wandered off and you gotta wander on. Jen, we love you, but we can't have you. You must go. Jane was born with skin darker than her peers. Spent a cycle telling them the reasons for her fears. No one seemed to know or care about the past. Then they showed her where she stood with every vote they cast. And they said